Okay, so we talked about last time about metabolism in a muscle cell. Skeletal muscle cells are active. We need a ready supply of ATP to keep ourselves standing or sitting or walking. So there is a diagram in your textbook on page 303 that kind of summarizes the metabolism. In the first 6 seconds of exercise, we have some stored ATP in our muscle cells. So we use that up first. Doesn't last very long. 6 seconds, that's not going to take us very far. And then we have this creatine phosphate, which is next. And that is just created by muscle cells. And we take the phosphate off of the creatine and add it to ADP, and then you have ATP, which is necessary for what? What part of muscle contraction did we look at last time that needed ATP? Where does ATP bind? Myosin head, yeah. It causes release of myosin from actin, right? And then it splits on the myosin head and cocks it back so we can attach to actin and then pull it inward. So yeah, so we need that ATP for muscle contraction, for the myosin, to bind myosin and pull on actin. So that creatine is gone in the next 10 seconds. So now we're 15 seconds into our exercise. Then we have to tap into stored glycogen. So the more we train our muscles and exercise, the more glycogen we store. So that's the benefit of training for like long distance activities or people who play basketball, soccer, those endurance sports, football. Well, football is kind of, start and stop, but there is people still do endurance training for football for making long runs and things. But regardless, we need that creatine phosphate, a ready source. But the glycogen is the next place we go. And glycogen are big, long units of stored glucose, so we just start cleaving off those glucose molecules. And then those glucose molecules can enter into what's the quickest way to get energy out of glucose. We talked about glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and electron transport chain. Which is the quickest? Glycolysis, yeah. Glycolysis is the quickest because the Krebs cycle has a lot of enzymes, takes a while. Electron transport, we get a lot of ATP out of that process, but again, it takes a while to get those things going. So glycolysis would be the next step, using stored glycogen. And then once that's used up, then we just have to rely on what's in our blood glucose. And how does that get there? The glucose in our blood, how does it get there? Diet. Yeah, whatever you ate. So if I ate something prior to exercise, I might have some glucose floating around my blood that I can use. But if I don't, I can rely on glycogen, stored glucose, right, in my muscles. So that after that first 30 to 40 seconds of, well, we have about 5 seconds of stored ATP, 10 seconds of creatine phosphate, 30 to 40 seconds of stored glycogen or blood glucose. After that, then we're in aerobic metabolism. We're in the Krebs cycle and all those other metabolic pathways we've already talked about. But just remember that creatine phosphate is something unique to muscle cells that we can use. And what we see as a waste product in the blood that gets filtered out by the kidneys that we see in the urine is creatine. We should see that, as a byproduct of muscle activity. And if the kidneys aren't working well, we're not going to see much creatine in the urine. We're going to see it in the blood, stuck there. Can't get out via the kidneys because the kidneys aren't functioning. So that's a sign of kidney disease as we look at those creatine levels. All right, so moving on to a different topic then is looking at different types of muscle contractions. So when we're moving our skeleton with the help of these muscles, there's different types of movements. So isometric means there's no change in length, but tension is increasing. So for example, if I lift up this table without bending my arm, okay, I just lift it up. I'm using my back muscles, but I'm holding it there, right? I'm holding it there, but my muscle isn't changing. It isn't increasing in tension. So when we use positional muscles like our back muscles, they're not really shortening. When I stand up, I'm not shortening my back muscles and leaning backward, right? They're contracted, but they're not changing in length. Where isotonic, we have a change in length, but the tension is constant. For example, if I lift up a 50-pound weight, like a barbell, and I'm moving it, right? Is my muscle lengthening and shortening as I'm moving that 20-pound barbell up and down? But the tension is still 20 pounds, right? The weight. So the tension isn't necessarily changing, but the muscle is shortening, okay? And then if I look at those kind of movements, I have concentric movements, which means when I'm lifting the barbell, we call that concentric, because the muscle is shortening to lift the weight. And eccentric is when I'm bringing the weight back down. So again, the tension, the weight is the same, but the length of the muscle is changing throughout the movement. And what we have found is when people are doing bodybuilding, they really want to develop strength and tone and maybe even size of muscle if they're in bodybuilding, is the motion downward, the eccentric, is what builds more muscle more than the concentric. But where do we see everybody putting all their effort, right? They go, oh, then they go, poof, right? That's not how you're supposed to do it. You're actually supposed to breathe out on the lift, right? On the concentric. So eccentric is where we really need to slow down when we're doing weightlifting. You know, it's hard to lift it up and then we tend to want to just drop it, but just slowly lower it. It should be, when you lift it up, it should be slow going back down if we want to build that strength. And muscle tone is just constant tension over a long period of time. So we have muscle tone. If you look at a muscle of someone who works out and you just kind of squeeze their arm, isn't it kind of always a little hard if it's developed, right? If it's not developed, it feels like mush when you feel someone's arm. Like when you think of the nursing home, you know, patients that have maybe a lot of fat on the backside of their arm and they're not well developed, it's just mushy when you squish. But if someone has developed muscles, you should be able to squish and feel some tone there, because you have not only larger muscle fibers because more myofibrils, but remember, we don't have more muscle fibers, we just have larger muscle fibers. But there's some small amount of contraction. The more myofibrils and this muscle tone that we have, the higher our metabolism. So people that want to lose weight think that they have to cut calories or go on long runs or aerobic activity, right? What they have found is just sometimes even a 20-minute weightlifting exercise, or even just using your own body weight, you know, in your basement or your living room, is enough to boost the metabolism and lose weight. We don't have to necessarily do these long distance, uncomfortable aerobic activities. It is good for the heart, of course. But I mean, as far as losing a little bit of weight, they say adding a strengthening program is really successful in boosting your metabolism, because people that have more muscle on their body burn more calories at rest than a person sitting next to them that has less muscle on their bodies. So having that muscle tone burns energy and is more metabolic. Okay, so, and when we look at smooth muscle, we have smooth muscle tone in the walls of our blood vessels. That's what keeps our blood pressure up. If our blood vessels didn't have a little bit of constriction and they just dilated, all of our blood vessels dilated and relaxed, all that smooth muscle, our blood pressure would bottom out and we wouldn't have blood flow to our brain or major organs, and we would die very quickly. So we need some amount of tone in smooth muscle as well as skeletal muscle. So muscle fatigue, there's different causes for a muscle when it's working to finally say, can't do it anymore, quit, right? So psychological, that depends on the individuals, what's going on in their head. And this happens to me every single time I go on a run. When I get near the end, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. Oh my gosh, it's way over there, I can't do this. And it's terrible. And I try to do things to empower myself, and still, when I see that finish line, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so far away, I can't do this. And then I feel terrible. I notice that now my legs hurt, I feel really short of breath, I feel just ugh, because I can see the finish line. Where other people, like my daughter, when I ran with her, we ran the Green Bay Half Marathon, and we got into Lambeau Field, and I knew we were near the end. So you get to run through Lambeau Field, which is really cool. So we get there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we're close to the end, and now I feel terrible in Lambeau Field. She's sprinting through Lambeau Field because her attitude is, we're almost done. Now I can go really fast because we're near the end. I can't. It's terrible. And psychological fatigue is something that is mental. It has nothing to do with what's going on in your body. It's all mental. So that's why, you know, they talk about listening to music. Yeah. I agree. I agree. Yep. Exactly, yeah. And they've actually done studies that people that listen to inspirational music outperform people that don't. But it depends if that speaks to you. Not everybody enjoys music. Some people find it nerve-wracking. You know, they find it distracting when they're running, where they like a quiet, peaceful environment when they're running. But yeah, music is important for some people. Muscular fatigue happens from ATP depletion. So how does ATP go away? Well, we have stored ATP, and then where do we get ATP from? Creatine phosphate, so that's gone right away. Then where? Glycogen, stored glycogen, and blood glucose. Can all those things be depleted? Yeah. All of those can be depleted if you're running in a long distance, you know, or any kind of type of aerobic activity that you're not prepared for, right? And then synaptic, it's a lack of acetylcholine. That is very rare because we have a ready supply of acetylcholine to develop action potentials. It's essential, right, to nervous system function. So we're able to make that on demand. So that is not a problem. So synaptic is rare, but psychological and muscular does happen. And psychological is a mental thing, so how you get through that, I don't know. People who run marathons, they say the highest amount of runs that some people train is, what is a marathon? 26.2, right? Mm-hmm. The highest amount some people train is 20 or 21 miles, and they stop at that point. And they say that the last 5 miles is all mental. That if you can make it 20, you can make it 26.2, and it's all in your head. So I would never run a marathon just because I know with my psychological fatigue issue, I'd be burnt out at mile 10. So, but anyway, so training is how we can overcome muscular fatigue, and psychological fatigue just depends on the individual. So when we get sore after working out, that's because we have damage to muscle fibers. So we find collagen is damaged, and enzymes inside the muscle, and just connective tissue. We find it outside the muscle cells in the extracellular fluid in people that have maybe participated in a hard basketball game or just did a bodybuilding exercise. But the good news about that is the muscle, and I can't emphasize this enough, and you have to tell your patients this, is that our muscles respond to the demands we place on them. So if I go to the gym and lift, I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, so sore for maybe the next day, or for me, it's usually the second day after exercising is when, you think you're feeling great the next day, oh yeah, that was good exercise, and then the next day comes, it's like, oh my goodness, I feel really sore. But over time, your body adapts to that and builds more myofibrils and repairs the damage that you did, but it takes 1 to 2 days to do that. So should we be lifting heavy weights every single day? No. And you talk to people that do bodybuilding, they know that, right? They have a legs day and an arms day and a chest day. So, you know, they have some knowledge of that. But what if I work at UPS and all I do is lift boxes every day? Am I going to get big, bulky muscles? Maybe a little bigger than the guy who has a desk job. But we're going to find that that's more aerobic because he's doing it all day, right? So he'll be more toned, but he might have some overuse injuries if he's not using proper body mechanics, right? When you're constantly bending over. Like as nurses, or all of you that are going into some healthcare environment, we're dealing with a lot of equipment and machines and stuff attached to our patients. So we're doing a lot of little movements, a lot of little repetitive movements every day, a slight bending of the back. Because there's a big emphasis in the hospitals to talk about safe patient movement and using ceiling lifts and gait belts and, you know, support things to put less pressure on us to move our patients. But still, just bending over, a slight bend at the waist, reaching for an IV, or handing a patient their call light, if you do that every day for 25 years, that is a wear and tear. So we need to build our muscles to support that bending. And what muscles support the back? If you want to have a strong lower back to be a strong person in healthcare, what should you be developing? Yeah, your abdominal muscles. And those are the least fun to develop, aren't they? For those of you that have tried, and maybe some of you are good at it, I'm terrible at it. I don't like the way it feels. And I always find that I throw my back out. When I tried, I've worked my abdominals. So I'm trying to figure out a good way. Isometric exercises are the best way to work the abdominals without injuring the back. But if you want to have a strong back, you've got to have a strong core. And we even find that with other, types of activities. If you have a bad hip, or you have bad knees, or you have bad ankles, you need to strengthen the muscles above, those stabilizing muscles. So if I have bad hips, I should check my abdominal muscles. If I have bad knees, I should check my hip muscles. Are they strong? My flexors and extenders of the hip. We talked about those in class. If I have bad feet and ankles, are my knees strong? Everything kind of just, transitions downward when we're not well developed in our muscles. And we have to get our patients moving. They want us to for us to leave them alone. I'm in pain, I'm not feeling well. What are you, crazy? You're gonna make me get up and walk? I just had my chest cracked open yesterday. That's what I hear, because patients don't want to move. They're in a lot of pain. So what can we do as healthcare people to help them stay strong and not let their muscles turn to mush in the weeks after illness or surgery? Well, yeah, in the bed, passive range of motion. But if it's a pain thing, I'm too painful, I can't get out of bed, I'm in too much pain. Yeah, treat them before you move. And that's one thing that we really need to think about is, okay, they have these pain meds as needed. We can give them as needed. We'll say, hey, you want to go for a walk? No, I'm in too much pain, I'm way too tired. Okay, well, when would you like to go for a walk? Let's pick a time. I don't ask, do you want to go for a walk? Because 75% of the time, no, of those patients that we're having trouble with. Most times, patients will go for a walk. They want to get out of the hospital. But of the difficult patients that are just kind of really feeling down and out, you don't ask them, do you want to go for a walk? You have to say, we have to get a walk in today, or 2 or 3. When would you like to go? Sometimes they do need 4 walks a day. Yeah. So when would you like to go? Well, not right now. Okay, that's fine. Should I come back in an hour? I have to do some other things. Come back in an hour, we'll go? I suppose. And they'll go. I've never had a patient say, absolutely not. Sometimes it can get a little bit difficult, especially older women sometimes that are like, oh no, I can't. And then you say, oh, that's unfortunate, because if we don't get you moving here, then you can't go home. You have to go to the nursing home and walk there. Oh, well, I guess I could try it then. But some people are okay with going to the nursing home. Some people don't feel safe at home, and they know it. They're scared, and they're alone, and going to the nursing home is not a bad option for some patients. But a lot of them don't want to go to the nursing home. So if you say it nicely, obviously, right, that if we can't get you walking here, because they think they get to stay at the hospital longer if they don't walk and they act sick. But if vital signs are stable and pain isn't out of control and they're just taking oral pain medicines, they can do that at home. They don't need to be in the hospital to take oral pain meds. So they're still going to be discharged or sent to a nursing home. So we have to encourage our patients and ourselves to get up and get moving. And we have to challenge our muscles, because there are, it's amazing when I look at the people in the hospital that are in their 70s. So 70s is not considered old by our standards of how we define old age. The early 70s is considered just old. There's a young old, and there's an old, and there's an old. In the early 70s is just considered old. And those people can be on trips. I mean, how many of you know someone in the early 70s that is golfing, going on trips, active, carrying their own groceries, going up, downstairs? Yeah, a number of you do. So what's the difference between those? Do you know someone in their 70s who's in a nursing home that needs help from the chair to the bed and back, and maybe doesn't have an underlying illness? And you wonder, what's the difference between these people? It's the amount of activity when they were younger. When I look at people that are 100, and I look up and then they look like they're 70 and they're getting up into the bathroom and they don't need a gait belt or a walker, I ask them, how come you're so active? What's the secret? And it's always the fact that they've been active as a young person. So if you want to have a good quality life as an older person, be active. Look at the older people in your families. Are they active, or are they sit on the couch complaining about bad hips and knees, can't walk, can't go to grandkids' basketball, volleyball games, baseball games because it's too far of a walk from the car to the field? Maybe that's a lifetime of obesity, carrying around a heavy frame for 50 years, that wears out the joints. Lack of muscular activity, they're weak. So we can control that. And a lot of you, everybody in here, I don't think anybody here is 70, everybody in here can work on that. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. People were moaning and groaning that the elevator was broken yesterday, especially the young college students, typical, that don't have like backpacks with 25 books in it and and a musculoskeletal injury or disorder. I mean, those people I feel for, definitely. But other people just like, oh, I got to go up the steps. That's a great way to build exercise into your day, is go up the steps. And you don't even have to go all the way up. I mean, if your heart is pounding and you feel miserable, then catch the elevator on the 2nd floor and then go up. We have to go all the way up to the 4th floor. But use those steps. That's a great way to build activity. You're here every, how many days a week? 3 days a week, right? Well, some of you are here 2 days a week. But that's 2 days a week of some muscle strengthening. So you can build it into your day. And even, parking a little extra distance, that's okay too, planning a few minutes ahead. So it's important that we get that activity in so we have a long quality of life. All right, so contractures is when we have no ATP, so you have neither contraction nor relaxation, but you just have a contracture. So the muscles are in a fixed state. So you have actin and myosin that are bound, but there's no movement of actin or myosin, and the person is still alive. But it's very hard to overcome movement when they have contractures. We see this in people that have nervous system disorders, like cerebral palsy. When you try to straighten out the hand of someone with cerebral palsy, it's very difficult because those muscles are contracted. And what is really sad that I learned when I was on pediatrics is that the muscles of the legs, when they're not being used, the muscles start to contract and they pull on the bones, and they actually will pull the femur, the head of the femur, out of the acetabulum and pop the hip out because of that muscle shortening. So kids with cerebral palsy, their hips will pop out by the time they're about between 2 and 3. They have a surgery where they have to actually go in, detach the muscles, rotate the hip, and fix them so they can sit in a wheelchair and not have their hips pop out. It's a very painful surgery for these kids, and it's just so difficult as a parent, to sign up your precious little toddler for this procedure. But it's necessary to keep them aligned so they can sit in comfort. Rigor mortis, we talked about that before, starts within the few hours after death, and then it's done in about 12 hours. So when we die, what happens? So calcium is in the extracellular fluid, but when we die, our plasma membranes weaken, and calcium enters and then binds to all those troponin, right? And then the myosin heads attach with whatever ATP is available at the time, and then they get stuck as ATP runs out. But then over time, all the proteins start to break down after death, and actin and myosin no longer attach, and then the body turns to mush. And I remember one morning, the kids it was a snowy morning, but they were like, oh my gosh, 5 and 7. They ran out to the barn and they're banging on the door. Somehow I locked the door and they were outside. Maybe I did it on purpose. I don't know. They were young. But they're banging on the door and they're like, the rabbit died. And they hold it up by the hind legs. And it was in rigor mortis that had just died in the last couple hours. And it was stretched out like this. And they were just holding it by its hind legs. And like, why is it so stiff? And I said, well, that's just what happens when animals die. Put it away. But they were like handling it like it was a stuffed animal. Poor thing. All right, this is really small. I apologize for that. It's a little bigger on your paper, I hope. Can you read the letters on your paper? Oh, yeah, that looks good. Okay. Well, we're going to just focus on the left side and the right side. So there's these middle types of fibers. But if I look at a typical muscle fiber, so if I look at my slice of roast beef, you can see the fascicles there, right? So we'll stay on the chart, but I just want to show you. This is, when we talk about muscle fibers, here's a fascicle, and here's all the muscle fibers inside of that fascicle. But if I took a slice of the muscle in your quadriceps, for example, I would see a mixture of these fibers. So all the muscle fibers, they do the same thing, but they do it a little differently depending on the type of fiber they are. And we are a mixture of these fibers. But some Olympic athletes tend to be one type of fiber more than another type of fiber, depending on the event that they're really good at. So fast glycolytic, the white one in the center, we're going to focus on that one first, and then we'll talk about slow oxidative, the really dark one just above the fast glycolytic. So slow oxidative fibers, if you look at your chart, what's unique about those fibers, I'm going to find this page in my book so I don't have to look so hard, is they don't contract very fast. The myosin ATPase, which is on the myosin head that splits ATP and allows it to cock its head and pull actin, it's a slower enzyme in these fibers. This is the slow oxidative, the dark fibers I'm talking about here. So the ones in the middle, the SO. So they have a slow myosin ATPase activity. They have a high myoglobin content, and myoglobin is a pigment in muscle that makes it dark in appearance, and it helps it store or carry extra oxygen. So if it carries extra oxygen, what pathway do you think it uses? Glycolysis? No, because glycolysis doesn't need oxygen. It's going to use Krebs and electron transport chain. So we know that those take a little longer to kick in, right? Those processes. So these are slower because of that, because they rely on those oxidative or those aerobic pathways. They're slower to kick in, but once they kick in, they can go a long time. So if we look at the rate of fatigue in your chart, they're slow to fatigue. So we recruit these right away, but they don't actually become useful until we kick into gear and get going, and that'll be maybe after the first minute of exercise. So these are good for long distance activities. Marathon runners that are Olympic level marathon runners or long distance athletes, if we look at a cross section of their muscle, we'd probably find more slow oxidative fibers compared to the other types. So they're born that way. And I feel bad when I see parents screaming at their kids, in the middle school is when they start to get competitive with their kids, right? They're screaming at their kids saying, come on, you can beat him, run faster, you're not trying hard enough. What if that kid that they're trying to beat has more slow oxidative fibers, it can just go the distance? How many of you know someone in middle school or high school that did very little training, got up and like ran the cross country meet and won it? It happens. And it's because they were just born with those type of fibers. So training definitely helps the average person. But if you're born with those type of fibers and you train, those are the amazing athletes that we see around us. And you can't force a kid to be an amazing athlete. And we're doing that in our society. As a parent, it's one of the most frustrating things I see people doing is pushing their kids in sports, thinking that they're going to be this amazing athlete and that that's the key to happiness is to be a college athlete. What those kids, I mean, I have my kids, you know, oh, invite so-and-so over. No, he can't go to the birthday party. He has a hockey game. No, he can't come to the movie because he has a hockey game. And these kids are losing out on social skills in other activities because of one sport. What happens if in high school that child breaks a bone so severely that they can't play that sport anymore? And their entire childhood was devoted to one activity. So we really have to be careful, especially when we look at, you know, trying to be competitive. Some people are more predestined to be successful in an activity than others just based on their fiber type. So let's compare some other things. Mitochondria, there's many mitochondria in the slow oxidative fibers. Does that make sense? That's where this aerobic activity and the metabolism occurs, right? The Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, that happens in the mitochondria. So it would make sense we'd see a lot of mitochondria in this type of fiber. A lot of blood cells, a lot of capillaries are in this type of muscle tissue because it needs a steady supply of oxygen, and the color is red. So if we look at, oh, and then the fiber diameter is small. If I look at a marathon runner, what does their body type look like? Are they big, bulky people? No, they're very thin, aren't they? Sometimes a little thin. So sometimes when I look at athletes that like to run, I sometimes wonder if they're tipping into that exercise addiction lifestyle. Like a skeleton. Yeah. Right. Oh, right. Oh, yeah. Her body is a machine for sure. But when you look at, you know, the aging of people that run to that amount, I don't think they look particularly young. I think they look a little older than the average person because of how hard that is on our body. Anyway, so let's think about turkey. That's coming up, right? Everybody's had, oh, turkey. Got everybody's attention on that one. When you think about a turkey, some people say, I'll have white meat. Other people say, I'll have the dark meat. Which one do you think this is? Slow oxidative. Is it the white meat or the dark meat? The dark meat, yeah. And what part of the turkey is dark meat? The legs. Do turkeys spend a lot of time walking and running around the farm? Yeah. Do you see flocks of turkeys overhead? No. No. If you do, you should maybe go to the doctor and get your eyesight checked or your mental status evaluated. No, they go up into a tree, right, and hang out maybe, but they don't fly. How about chicken? What's the dark meat on a chicken? The thigh and the legs, right? But not the breast, which is where the flight muscles attach. Do you see flocks of chickens flying overhead? No, they're runners. So that's the dark meat. So we see more fat in that meat, correct? Because that's a source of energy for those working muscle fibers, those slow oxidative fibers. How about, you see flocks of geese or ducks overhead? Definitely this time of year. I haven't seen any yet, probably because of the warm weather. I haven't seen any. Has anybody heard any? Or? Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. Nothing. Yeah, I haven't heard them. But I've had my head in the sand most of the semester. Anyway, so what do you think about their meat of their breast, where the flight feathers attach? What? It is. And you sound like you've eaten it and you know for sure. Yes, it is. It's all dark and greasy meat. Duck meat is dark and greasy because it's mostly slow oxidative fibers. So let's talk about the other type of fibers then, the whitest one, the fast glycolytic. Look down that chart on the far right of your chart. Speed of contraction is very fast, so the myosin ATPase activity on the myosin head is much more rapid. It splits that ATP very quickly. The primary pathway is anaerobic glycolysis. So do we need a lot of mitochondria if we're going to undergo glycolysis primarily? No. Good blood supply bringing oxygen? Nope. We don't need oxygen for glycolysis. Myoglobin, do we need an extra storage of oxygen? No. So that's why this meat is called white meat. It's because it doesn't need all that extra stuff. But it can store a lot of glycogen because we do need glucose for glycolysis, right? So there's going to be high glycogen stores there. And these are the last to be recruited because they kick in very quickly. So we recruit the slow twitch first to get them going, but they're not going to help us out until after the first minute of exercise. But because the fast glycolytic are so quick, we recruit them and they're right there ready to do the job. So they fatigue very quickly though. So when you're doing something fast and rapid and strong, you can't do that for very long. So if a person is going to run, what's the shortest distance on a track for a track event? 100-meter dash. Do people breathe even during that time? When they say go, look at people's faces when they're running that. They're just, they're not. You're not, right? You're not bringing oxygen in during that time. What? Yeah, in those short distances, yeah. And same thing with swimming. You know, if you're running, if you're doing a 50, I don't know what I did hundreds, but I did backstroke, so I was able to breathe. But if you're doing the freestyle and you're just doing a 50, you're not getting up during that time. You're just going. So these are good for short bursts of intense activity. How about if I'm lifting up, like doing deadlifting, we're doing this. Am I breathing during that? Look at their faces. No, that's fast glycolytic fibers. So those people are, again, predestined, if they have a lot of fast glycolytic, to do those activities really well. Did someone have a question or comment? Yes.
So that is like fast glycolytic ones, like instant like reflex, like fall into muscles that generally use to react.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, are those muscles more active in a reflex arc? They would respond more quickly, so yeah, I think that would be true. That's a very good question. Yeah, yeah, deep thought. I like it. Yeah. Yeah, I would think so, because we want them to be active and have the energy they need to hold us up, right, to catch yourself when you're falling. Yeah, but a lot of that too requires the nervous system to respond, and we know as we age, the nervous system responds less often. So, or not less often, not as quickly. So people are more likely to fall and injure themselves when they're older. Like if they trip on a rug, they're less likely to put their arms out because they don't have that ability to initiate, it's slower. The synaptic transmission is slower in older people. And they're more likely to get in an accident. I mean, we were driving along and my daughter was showing me something, her iPod charger was not working, and I was looking down for a minute, then all of a sudden I look up and the car is stopped dead in front of me, and I had to slam on the brakes, and we missed the car by like that much. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, but had I maybe been 20 years older, I probably wouldn't have responded that quickly. So that's why the elderly are more likely to be involved in some of those accidents, because they don't have that reaction time. And we know as we drink, right, or take narcotic pain meds, that slows reaction time too. So, that's just part of the nervous system. Okay, so we have these intermediate fibers. Like I said, I'm not going to talk about the ones in the middle, the fast oxidative, but we can take a slow oxidative and make it more of a fast oxidative. We can switch between the fast and the slow oxidative fibers. So with training and exercise and repetition, we can get our slow ones to go a little faster. But can we make a slow oxidative turn into a fast glycolytic? No. Two totally different types of fibers. And again, we're a mixture of these fibers, or depending on the muscle, we tend to see one cluster, over another. So like with the turkey and the chicken, the ducks and the geese, we see a, emphasis on one more than the other. So when we exercise, here's my example of the marathon runner versus the, the sprinter. You can see those fibers are much larger in the sprinter. So endurance exercises like aerobic activity, running, jogging, builds more capillaries, more mitochondria, more myoglobin production. Does it say anything about more myofibrils? Not really, no. So the muscles don't get bigger, they just get more efficient at what they do. And then resistance training, this is strength training. We still get more capillaries, more mitochondria, because we do need those. Not initially, but more myofilaments, myofibrils, storing more glycogen to feed glycolysis. So we see that in resistance training. So that's where you get the bigger muscles. So even a few minutes every other day, if you read my little blurb on the bottom here, a few minutes every other day can cause someone to put on 50% more muscle in a year. Just a few minutes a day. Again, our body is designed to adapt to the stresses we place on it. So if you go to Walmart for $20 and just buy some little arm weights, and you just do those when you're sitting on the couch watching TV, to set them right by the couch there. Because if you're relying on the Y 10 miles down the road to lure you over there to get going with exercise, probably less likely. Baby steps is the best way to go. So buying some dumbbells and just putting them next to your couch so they call you while you're sitting there, it's a good way to get some strengthening. What else can I say about that? Hypertrophy is just increasing in size, right? And remembering that our muscles occur in what we call antagonistic pairs, which means the biceps, when the biceps is shortening, what muscle on the other side of the arm is lengthening? The triceps brachii. Don't forget when you take your lab exam, we have triceps brachii, biceps brachii. We have the biceps femoris on the back of the leg, right? So biceps, you have to say brachii or femoris so we know where you're at. But anyway, those are antagonistic muscles. One works against the other. So some people that do a lot of bodybuilding, they like the big biceps, so they focus and focus on the biceps and the deltoids. But what happens to muscles as they develop? They tend to be a little, they tend to shorten a little bit. They have that tone. So if you look at someone who's really well developed, they kind of walk like this, And why is that? They really shouldn't be all bound up like that. If they work the triceps as hard as they work the biceps, they should be balanced in their appearance. They shouldn't be bent over looking like this. That's too much emphasis on the biceps, right? So that's why we talk about being muscle bound. So it's important to do both, even though one feels better than the other, right? Because we use these muscles a lot more, don't we? Getting out of the car, grabbing your book, getting a gallon of milk. We're always using our biceps. Does it take much effort to use the triceps? Just to drop your arm? Because the triceps lengthens, right? We don't really use that one much, so we really have to work it. So people are weaker on the triceps. It doesn't feel as good. You know, when you're doing this and impressing all the people at the gym, right? It feels really good. But doing this one, don't let anybody look, right? Because it's really weak. But it's amazing how quickly you can build muscle if you focus on it. So what do we get to look forward to as we age? A breakdown in muscle mass. Proteins break down with aging. It's just part of the aging process. Now, nutrition, good nutrition with antioxidants can reduce this aging process. We know people on healthy diets tend to show less effects of aging compared to junk food junkies that sit on the couch. So if we want to reduce this process, good nutrition, and of course exercise. Increased time for the muscle contract in response to a nervous stimuli. So we talked about reflexes go down as we age. So when grandma starts to trip on a slippery rug, or a cat that runs in front of her when she's heading to the bathroom or the kitchen, more likely to fall and injure herself because she's not going to respond. Think of how many times you've almost tripped and you've caught yourself, right? Elderly people don't do that as easily. And if they're wearing slippery shoes, it just kills me when I go to Quick Trip and I see it's a snowy, icy day, and I see an old woman get out of her car and she's just shuffling along in these little old lady shoes with the smooth bottoms. Oh no, I mean, that's terrible. So think of the elderly people that you're going to see this holiday season. Take a look at their shoes and say, Grandma, you should probably get some better shoes. Look at the bottoms of those. You don't want to fall and end up in a nursing home. You got to get some better shoes. So talk to them about that. And I do see people with good solid shoes too, and that's encouraging, when you see people with good steady tennis shoes. Reduce stamina, so we can't go the distance. So if a person is in a running race, for example, you're never going to see the 50-year-olds in the same category as the 25-year-olds because their muscles just can't go the same speed and distance as a similarly trained 25-year-old. Now, do 50-year-olds beat 25-year-olds? Definitely, but the 25-year-olds aren't training as much as the 50-year-olds are. So, and like I find at my age, in my upper 40s, I'll never be in the top of my group in any running race because a lot of people my age are empty nesters. They're not crazy people with a lot of kids. And as a result, that's all they do, is they just train and train and train. I know a woman exactly my age. She's always in my age group. She runs sometimes 25 miles a couple days a week. And she ran a half marathon doing a 7-minute mile average for the half marathon. And she didn't even take first. I think she took second. So that is incredible. So anyway, so there's a lot more time as people get older, where 18, 19-year-olds usually are not focusing. They're in college. They're just graduating high school. They're not always out training for hours, even though they have the ability to be amazing. And those that do, do really well too, those that do train. Increased recovery time. So again, takes longer to get back after a muscle activity. We lose muscle fibers. That causes that reduced muscle mass. And decreased density of capillaries. So they don't get as good blood supply to their muscle. Again, so that leads to the reduced stamina. So how can we slow all this? What's the magic word of the day? Exercise. Yes, exercise. All right, we'll pick up next time with the cardiovascular system.